the former iBuyPower player and well-known streamer Steel had a little theory he came up with on his stream, and I'll link to in the description box below because it's a Twitch VOD link, where he gave his like conspiracy theory that Cloud9's strats on T-side obviously remind him of DaZeD strats, and obviously Steel used to play with DaZeD in iBuyPower. Famously, obviously they were banned, but actually Steel was already out of the team at that point in time. And I gotta say, watching the VOD is pretty hard because unfortunately he's eating wings as he does it. And I don't know about you, but I can't handle the sound of people eating like that with their mouth open. And even worse, he doesn't just like say a sentence then eat. He goes like, you know, thing is, the way Cloud9's calling, like, come on, like it'll trigger the fuck out of you, whatever. But if you want to hear the whole theory, the VOD's below. Now, the basic premise is the old DaZeD style of T-side calling is like you throw your utility, you wait for the enemy to throw his utility back, you draw it out of them, you set up, you draw it all out, all the smokes, all the mollies, all the flashes. I mean, it wasn't really mollies back then, but... And then after a set amount of time, you then sort of re-engage the site dry. You just attack, but you've used up all the utilities, and then it just becomes a firefight. And this obviously, by the way, used to work because DaZeD in iBuyPower had the most skilled NA team. And so this is a very good strategy to have, because then you're creating almost what Fnatic tried to do in this last era, where they just went in dry anyway, except they didn't even draw everything out to the same degree. But you're just creating aim duels when you have the superior players, and you're going to overwhelm the site in that way. Now, this conspiracy theory, the reason I'm doing a video on it is not as ridiculous as it sounds initially, actually. I mean, consider that the in-game leader of Cloud9 is Stewie2K. So let's just think about that context for a second. This is someone who, even into the early part of 2016, was only known for being an all-aim, no-brain, super aggro player, hyper aggro player from ESEA Premier. That was his competitive background, so basically non-existent on any kind of relevant global scale. And mainly known, not even for the ESEA Premier stuff, for playing in FPL and for being this guy who just had progressive push through smokes, tried to be super aggro all the time, talked a little bit of shit, had some skills, but people thought because of his style of play, he'd never even make it as a pro player. And yet, not only has he made it in a Cloud9, but he's the best player in Cloud9, and more importantly, he's the in-game leader. And now, with him as in-game leader, they're a top 10 team in the world. They've gone right up my rankings. They've had accomplishments. They made, obviously, to the final Dream at Bucharest. They made top 4 at Star Series Season 2. So the idea that that sort of player would not only make it, but become an in-game leader, and then as in-game leader take his team to a higher level than they'd been at in, like, what, a year or something? It does seem a bit implausible. So actually the conspiracy theory initially achieves its effect that some conspiracies do, which is that they're reassuring, or they make sense of an aspect in the world that doesn't make sense otherwise through traditional means of explaining it. Secondly, DaZeD is someone who, after his ban, was initially working with a CSGO team in a coaching role and was looking to develop that until, unfortunately, he was kind of snitched on, and then Valve stepped in and they said that like people like City and DaZeD couldn't be involved with teams, etc., and implied that people should stay away from them. Thirdly, and finally, Jack Etienne, the Cloud9 owner, is actually one of the few people in esports, I think, on his end, is smart enough and is shrewd enough at identifying talent and what he needs in his teams that he probably could get something like that to work, and could get this through some level of abstraction or obfuscation where we wouldn't know it's a coach and the information comes to him and he passes it on to this guy. I think he's smart enough that he could pull that off if he thought it was worthwhile. Problem is, when you actually start to look on the context and the finer details, the theory does kind of unravel. Like, the way that Cloud9 is calling at the moment, the way Stewie2K is operating tactically, is not particularly in-depth. It's not a lot of shit where it's got, like, you've got a set strat, but it's got all these different audibles within it. It's got all these variants that you can switch up at different times. Not really. I mean, there's like a fairly limited strat book. I mean, Shroud himself, even in the interview on E-League, said, like, they run out of strats, like, they have issues in that sense. Stewie2K himself is quite inexperienced in that sense, so understandably still learning the role. He has to learn how to add in these variants that work and how to switch it up on the fly. And because he hasn't quite got that aspect done yet and reading the game, they're actually a little bit predictable if you've done your work on them and study on them. Now, in NA, that doesn't matter because NA people either aren't doing the work or they're just able to brute force it with, in general, better players than most of those NA teams. It's not that they're using execution and brute forcing it. They're brute forcing it with their skills, even if someone knows what's coming. Then there's also the fact that DaZeD didn't really innovate or create that style. He's very famous for it, and in NA particularly famous for it, because obviously Sean Gez's style is quite different. But that already existed. There were European teams who did this as well. A bunch of people already existed with that style. And so, yeah, in that sense, it's not like DaZeD was the one who came up with that even. Then you got to add in that, think logically about the whole Stewie 2K becoming the best player. That's the key detail, that he became the best player in the team and then he's an in-game leader. So Stewie 2K, if you look at the way they play, calls around himself and his own skills. It's pretty much the Shox style in G2 and then the latter day Envious before Shox was kicked. Which, by the way, makes sense, because since Stewie 2K is the only, until they got automatic, reliable, good player in the team, he calls around his style so that he can be more effective, and then people fit around him, and as a result, they have a chance to win, and they've become a better team overall, and now they've become a decent enough team because he's a pretty good player. He's probably one of the best NA players, if not the best NA player. There's also the issue that if you know this piece of context, it really makes it make a lot more sense than it did initially on the surface as I presented there, which is that we all thought, because of Slemmy coming into the team and the team improving a lot tactically, that was Slemmy and that he set in place a system, and even if he wasn't a good player himself individually, didn't matter, the system existed there, and it certainly, you looked at the results and that certainly seemed like what the time frame, the chronology was. But I've heard that Slemmy wasn't that integral in that sense. In fact, he wasn't necessarily the guy coming up with the strats even. It was people like Stewie and I think maybe Nothing, I forget who the other one was. And so it doesn't seem that confusing anymore that Slemmy leaves, and actually they continue on with the similar strength and tactically decent, and they continue to get better and better without him. So in terms of DaZeD and his actual involvement with this, at the time of recording this video, when you watch this video, I actually have a reflections with DaZeD out today in which he answers this very topic. I bring up this conspiracy theory to him and find out what he thinks on that particular aspect. Finally, the ultimate reason why this could not happen, and would not work is not because of Jack, it's not because of Cloud9, it's actually just because, if you know anything about the NA CSGO scene, this is the worst scene in the history of esports for keeping secrets. They can't keep secrets within a team. Certainly, if you try a player or you think about a player, that player tells his friends and his ex-teammates tell their friends, and people within your team even may tell people, and everyone operates on that stupid logic of like, listen, you're my friend, so keep this under your hat, will you? You know, I'm just telling you because you're my friend. Well, guess what? Your friend has a friend like that who he would also tell the secret to, but keep it under your hat. And as long as someone in the world has a friend in a connecting loop, everyone ends up finding out, even though you never would have told the third, fourth, fifth, seventh, sixth, seventh, because they're not your friends close enough. So that principle is why those people can't keep a secret. Then you've got to add in, they're incredibly narcissistic and just idiotic. So as a result, people just want a little bit of attention, so they just blurt out something that's going to happen. Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to see who Cloud9's going to pick up, and then they'll mention something on their stream or something like that. That doesn't happen in the European scene to the same degree. Sure, people behind the scenes know some of the moves, but it's not as clear cut, and it's not as quick that you find out, and certainly there are secrets that can happen without you finding out until they're essentially almost done. I mean, some of them you'll only find out a day or two before. So in that sense, I don't think that NA could keep something like that under wraps. I think some idiot would say either a Cloud9 player would brag to someone else, or he'd tell someone, right, it's not quite just because it's due to get, something like that. And so as a result, I don't think that NA could keep it under wraps. But anyway, if you want to know what DaZeD actually thinks, you can watch the DaZeD reflections.